My son, when he was probably 3 or 4, was asked, like, what is art? And he said, art is not to be touched. And I was like, oh my goodness, his mother is a conservator, because that's what he's been trained at.
We think of art as something precious, but not something to be interacted with physically.
At MoMA or any other museum, it is a taboo to touch. There are signs all over the galleries that say, don't touch. And so that becomes ingrained in us.
When we show works in the galleries, they're not in cases, because a lot of this art is not glazed or framed. It was like a reaction against that kind of traditional way of showing art. So you're also seeing everyday objects that are becoming part of artwork. And of course, you want to kind of touch it. Everybody has oils in their finger. If you put a finger mark on an artwork, you get this impression of the lines on your finger. If you don't remove that relatively quickly, over time that will actually etch into the surface. It's potentially a permanent change. We are a very large museum and we have thousands and thousands of visitors every day. If every visitor touched Starry Night, that's going to damage that work. There are contemporary works where interaction is invited. So we think about works by Felix Gonzalez Torres, where you take a candy from a pile or a poster from a stack. There's a work by Janet Cardiff and George Burroughs Miller called Killing Machine, and you press a button to activate that artwork and then it runs through a cycle. We had a wonderful exhibition with video games, so like an early version of Pac-Man and Space Invaders. So those you need to press buttons to interact with. How do you cue that to the viewer? Why is it I can touch this work but not that one? One of the works that raised this question is Yoko Ono's painting To Be Stepped On.
So, like this one, it's called Painting to Be Stepped On, and this is a very old piece, but I just thought that it's nice for people to step on a painting and sort of make their natural mark.
No respect for art, eh?
Well, you know, it's a nice way of...
Yoko Ono is a very well-known figure. What's lesser known is really the first decade. When she arrives in New York, she's a very young artist, and she's going to develop a practice that opens the idea that art doesn't need ownership. Art can be freely distributed to others. That an artist doesn't need a museum or a gallery to exist, can directly connect with the viewer.
For her first public showing of any work, which was at her Chambers Street loft, she chose to show instruction paintings. It was the first time she had an audience, but it's the first time she invited the audience into the work.
I will be sitting on the center of the stage. Please come out and wrap me with a gauze bandage here until I disappear.
So interesting to do an instruction piece. I just thought about it. Why don't we do it in a way that you don't finish the piece, but ask other people to finish it in their own way? But you know what? I was an old-fashioned artist as well. And that part of me was saying, I don't want anybody to even put a scratch on my work, you know. And I thought, oh, am I going to let somebody touch my piece and make it different? And as soon as I thought that way, I thought, that's why this piece is good.
You can see here there's Isamu Noguchi and Toshiro Mayuzumi, who are stepping on the canvas there.
That's so interesting. The work looks so different here.
Yeah, exactly. In this case, it's really just the loose, untreated canvas on the ground. It's always going to be new with each installation. It's the same thing with Yoko when she talks about performance, that she's never re-performing or reenacting a performance. Each performance is new. And so I think each presentation of Painting to Be Stepped On is going to have its own character and its own presentation.
The version that's currently in the gallery is this white canvas which is stretched around a board and it's framed with a sort of thin metal frame around it, and it has a metal plaque on it that is recording Painting to be Stepped On. When that was going into the collection galleries nearly 2 years ago, there was discussion around like, how do we show this work?
We asked that it could be stepped on again. And that was quickly realized not to be a possibility with MoMA. I mean, it becomes kind of a conceptual art joke, you know, the idea that you have a work that's literally titled A Painting to be Stepped On, and the museums and navigating ways for people not to step on it. Part of that is you look at the foot traffic that you have.
Yeah, we have thousands
work.
of people coming through the door every day.
Yeah.
It was decided that it wouldn't be interacted with, but to have it horizontal and close to the floor. So that pedestal was built, everybody was like agreed to it, it went in the gallery. And then the reports that we had from the gallery were that people were trying to step on it because they're reading the label on the wall or they know the artwork and they know that's the point. That's when we kind of started thinking about, wait, why don't we try activating the work, so removing that painting and then making the work that could be stepped on the floor.
Last time when we spoke, you gave me some directions to make Painting to be Stepped On to size.
Based on the original shape that Yoko presented in 1961. But the next time Yoko showed the work in 1966, she chose to, evolve the piece and show it as a framed canvas, and has done it in, other iterations as well, where it's just a larger piece of loose canvas. Showing these paintings was never about the canvas itself, it was always about the instruction.
Yoko Ono really thought very deeply about her relationship to museums and institutions. If some of her purpose is to engage directly with the viewer, the institution suddenly stands in between. It's really pushing the boundaries and creating work that's going to be very difficult for an institution to manage. And Painting to be Stepped On is absolutely impossible for an institution to be the custodian of. You come to realize that a museum is imperfect.
To have it come into an institution and still be a provocation and not necessarily be contained by the institution is going to be exciting to see it continue to live as it wants to live.
What's most important for many artists is that art needs to stay alive. And it's a form of transgression or disruption to say, no, in fact, art is going to be about you having a physical contact with an object or another person.
The gloves are hopefully going to let through the temperature and the texture of the works of art. We are going to touch Matisse's Heads of Jeanette. So Georgina, do you want to start with the first work? So this is the earliest work. I think we were among the first museums to offer touch tours to people who are blind or partially sighted. And during a touch tour, we visit sculpture from our collection deemed touchable.
I hear people who are blind or have low vision say, oh, there's nothing for me at that art museum. As someone who has had low vision their whole life, part of the reason I got into this field was to try to disrupt that idea.
Touch takes time because you want to be able to explore. And sometimes it's just about repeating a gesture and seeing what each repetition tells you.
As an artist, I do all my sculptures and all my drawings through memory, remembering the way something feels in my hands and, measuring it against my own body.
But usually when I'm touching sculpture, I don't really care what it looks like. It's not just like trying to create a picture in my mind's eye. Your hands are taking a journey. Mm-hmm. It's the pleasure of the forms.
Yes.
And whether or not it looks like a person holding a guitar, I don't care that much. I'm no good at mental images. That's not how my imagination works.
There's something about touch as my first language and my first point of contact for anything in the world, navigating it as a blind person. Actually getting to touch something really brings up a lot of feeling and emotion.
It creates this really remarkable connection with the artist. You can imagine working with this clay yourself and pinching where Matisse pinched or smashing where he smashed. It's about sort of the connection of the body. It does increase a feeling of ownership. Like there's actually research that talks about that, how touching something immediately makes you feel a stronger connection to that object.
One, two, three.
Will you touch me? Will you touch me? When my body's full of fear, will you reach me? Will you reach me? When my body's so cold, nothing short of the softest word can reach me now.
You know, I've never really thought about stepping on art. I feel like that's a big no-no, like don't touch the art.
It looks pretty ordinary, but when you say 1960, that's older than me. And so to step on it, it's a lot of responsibilities.
There's still not that much that you can interact with, even 60 years later.
Have to get every bit of it, right?
We can feel it.
That idea of empowering others to perform an action. You don't become the artist, but you become part of the art. That idea of disruption, transgression, almost sometimes violence is very much there. I don't think the idea was to destroy paintings. If you step on a painting, you're going to change it forever. There's great playfulness in that work. So touch was always an important element within a practice, and multiple works ask the viewer to think about touching either objects or people. The simplest one is just one word, say just touch.
It's a pity. I mean, we're getting not closer, but more distant to each other. I don't force them to do something. So they can do it conceptually too, you know. Maybe that's a start, and we would step into the future where it's all right to do it again.
And one thing I've learned from touching art is that the artwork tells you how it wants to be touched. So you feel yourself in communication with the artist.
There's this idea for Yoko that nothing stayed forever. A painting itself deteriorates in time despite conservation efforts. For her, rather than trying to fight against that idea, she decided to find a way to bring it into a positive change. Touch is something that creates connection, and connection creates communication, and communication is what people need to create peace.